Have you ever wondered where the story of human civilization truly began? Many historians point to a sun-scorched land nestled between two mighty rivers, a place the ancient Greeks called Mesopotamia, meaning the land between the rivers. This is the story of how geography shaped one of the world's first great civilizations. Located in what is now modern-day Iraq, with parts in Syria, Turkey, and Iran, Mesopotamia was defined by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These rivers were its lifeblood, but also its greatest challenge. Both originate in the highlands of Turkey, flowing southeast towards the Persian Gulf, but unlike the predictable, gentle flooding of Egypt's Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates were wild and unreliable. Their floods could be violent and destructive, wiping out crops and settlements in a sudden, furious surge. So, why would anyone choose to live in such a volatile place? The answer lay in what the floods left behind. Each time the waters receded, they deposited a layer of rich, dark, alluvial soil across the plains. In a region with scorching hot summers and very little rainfall, this incredible fertility was a gift. It created a narrow ribbon of green, an oasis of potential in an otherwise arid landscape. This fertile soil was the key, but unlocking its full potential required human ingenuity. The people of Mesopotamia couldn't just rely on the rain, they had to learn to master the rivers. Around 6500 BCE, a monumental shift began. Early communities started to experiment with irrigation. This wasn't just a small ditch here or there. It was the beginning of a massive engineering project that would span millennia. They dug canals to channel water from the rivers to their fields. They built dikes to hold back the unpredictable floodwaters and constructed reservoirs to store water for the long, dry growing season. This was a game changer. Irrigation allowed them to transform dry, dusty land into productive farmland, guaranteeing harvests and creating a stable food supply where none was guaranteed before. This constant battle to control the water had a profound effect on their society. Building and maintaining an extensive network of canals, dikes, and reservoirs wasn't a one-person job. It required immense cooperation and organization. Entire communities had to work together, planning the layout, digging the channels, and ensuring the water was distributed fairly. This shared need for water management forged the very first complex social structures. Leaders emerged to organize labor, resolve disputes over water rights, and oversee these critical public works. In a very real sense, the challenge of irrigation laid the groundwork for government and law. The environment also dictated where people lived. Early settlements weren't just scattered randomly. People smartly built their homes and villages on high ground, like natural ridges or man-made mounds we now call tells. These elevated spots offered crucial protection from the devastating floods that swept across the plains. Being close to the river was essential for water, but being just high enough to stay dry was a matter of survival. This strategic settlement pattern shows a deep understanding and adaptation to their challenging world. Mesopotamia's location was also a strategic crossroads. To the north and east were mountains, rich in resources that the flat river plains lacked: timber for building, stone for tools and construction, and metals for crafting stronger weapons and more beautiful ornaments. To the south and west stretched vast deserts, which served as natural barriers, but also as long-distance trade routes for those brave enough to cross them. The Tigris and Euphrates weren't just sources of water, they were highways. They formed natural corridors for trade, travel, and the exchange of ideas, connecting diverse cultures and peoples. This constant flow of goods and knowledge made Mesopotamia a vibrant hub of innovation. The combination of fertile soil and sophisticated irrigation led to a revolutionary development: food surplus. For the first time in human history, communities could produce more food than they needed just to survive. This surplus was the catalyst for civilization as we know it. It meant that not everyone had to be a farmer. People could specialize. Some became skilled artisans, creating beautiful pottery and textiles. Others became priests, dedicated to understanding the will of the powerful river gods. Traders ventured out to distant lands, and a class of administrators and rulers emerged to manage the growing complexity of city life. This division of labor, all made possible by agricultural surplus, led to a population boom and the rise of the world's first cities. But the relationship with the environment was a continuous dance of adaptation. The rivers constantly changed their course. Silt would clog the canals, requiring endless dredging and maintenance. And a new, insidious threat emerged from the very irrigation that gave them life: salinization. As water evaporated from the fields, it left behind tiny amounts of salt. Over centuries, this salt built up in the soil, slowly poisoning the land and reducing its fertility. Some historians believe that rising soil salinity contributed to the decline of ancient Sumerian cities in the south, forcing power to shift northwards. This shows that even the most ingenious solutions can have long-term consequences, a lesson we are still learning today. From the unpredictable floods to the life-giving soil, from the need for cooperative engineering to the strategic location at a continental crossroads, the geography of Mesopotamia was the crucible in which civilization was forged. The challenges of the environment spurred innovation in technology, society, and governance. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers were both providers and destroyers, and it was in learning to live with this duality that the people of Mesopotamia laid the foundations for the modern world. Their story is a powerful reminder of the intricate and enduring connection between humanity and the environment. Imagine the world about 12,000 years ago. The last ice age is ending. The climate is shifting, getting warmer and more stable. For the people living in the Near East, this wasn't just a change in weather, it was a change in everything. The vast, cold plains were transforming into lush, fertile landscapes, especially in a region we now call the Fertile Crescent. This arc of land, stretching from the eastern Mediterranean right into Mesopotamia, was about to become the cradle of a revolution. For millennia, our ancestors were hunters and gatherers, constantly on the move, following the seasons and the herds. Their survival depended on what they could find each day. But as the environment changed, so did their strategies. They began to notice something incredible. The wild grasses, the ancestors of wheat and barley, could be intentionally planted and harvested. At the same time, they started managing herds of wild sheep, goats, and cattle, not just hunting them. This wasn't a sudden event, it was a slow, experimental process over thousands of years. But this process, the domestication of plants and animals, would fundamentally reshape human society. We call it the Neolithic Revolution. Why was this such a big deal? Because for the first time, humans had a relatively stable and predictable food source. They no longer had to roam vast territories. They could settle down in one place, and that's exactly what they did. By around 6500 BCE, we see the first small agricultural villages popping up across northern Mesopotamia. This surplus was a safety net, a buffer against lean times, and the very foundation of a more complex society. With a steady food supply and a settled lifestyle, populations began to grow. Villages expanded, but life wasn't just about farming. The shift to agriculture triggered a cascade of other changes. Think about it, when not everyone has to be involved in finding food day to day, people can start to specialize. We see the emergence of craftspeople potters creating new types of containers, toolmakers honing stone axes and sickles, and weavers producing textiles. This is the beginning of a division of labor. Social structures also started to become more complex. In a hunter-gatherer group, everyone was more or less equal. But in these new villages, we see the first hints of social stratification. Some families or individuals might have had larger houses, more land, or more elaborate burials, suggesting they held a higher status or greater wealth. Society was beginning to have layers. This period of early agriculture and settlement is often called the Ubaid period, which lasted from roughly 6500 to 3800 BCE. The Ubaid culture is famous for its distinctive, beautifully painted pottery, which archaeologists find spread over a vast area, showing just how connected these early communities were. But the most significant Ubaid innovation was the expansion of irrigation agriculture. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers were the lifeblood of the region, but their floods were unpredictable. The Ubaid people learned to harness this water. They dug canals, channeling river water to fields far from the riverbanks. This was a game changer. It massively increased the amount of land that could be farmed, leading to even greater food surpluses and supporting larger populations. But building and maintaining these large-scale irrigation systems required something new: organization and cooperation on a level never seen before. You couldn't just have one family digging a canal. Whole communities had to work together. They appear to have been the economic and administrative hubs of their communities. This concentration of power in a central institution was a critical step toward the formation of governments and states. The Ubaid world was also an interconnected one. These weren't isolated villages. They were part of a network of trade and cultural exchange. Raw materials like obsidiana volcanic glass perfect for making sharp tools were traded over hundreds of miles. Precious metals and fine ceramics also moved along these early trade routes, spreading technology, ideas, and artistic styles across the region. A shared culture was developing. However, this new way of life wasn't without its challenges. The very irrigation that brought such abundance also created long-term environmental problems. As water evaporated from the irrigated fields, it left behind small amounts of salt. Over centuries, this salt built up in the soil, a process called salinization. Eventually, the land could become so salty that it was no longer fertile enough to grow crops like wheat. We see evidence that later Mesopotamian farmers had to switch to more salt-tolerant crops like barley. This is a powerful, early example of how human activity can profoundly, and sometimes negatively, alter the environment, creating a feedback loop that requires new innovations and adaptations. So, let's recap this monumental transformation. Over a span of about 2,500 years, the people of Mesopotamia went from being mobile hunter-gatherers to living in permanent, organized agricultural villages. They mastered farming and irrigation, creating food surpluses that allowed for population growth and the specialization of labor. This led to more complex social structures, the beginnings of inequality, and the rise of central institutions like the temple that held both religious and economic power. This period, from roughly 6,500 to 4000 BCE, laid all the necessary groundwork for what was to come next. It was the slow, steady buildup of social and technological complexity that would eventually explode into the world's first urban civilization. The seeds of the city-state, of writing, of kingship all were sown in the fertile soil of these first farming communities. Beginning around 4000 BCE, the region of southern Mesopotamia experienced significant social and technological transformations that laid the foundation for urban civilization. This period, known as the Uruk period, is named after the city of Uruk, which became one of the earliest and largest urban centers in human history. By approximately 3100 BCE, Uruk was home to tens of thousands of inhabitants, representing a profound shift from small villages to complex cities. The growth of Uruk and other emerging cities was supported by advances in agricultural productivity. Extensive irrigation networks allowed for increased crop yields, providing food surpluses that could sustain large populations. These surpluses freed portions of the population to engage in activities other than farming, including specialized crafts, trade, and administrative tasks. Urban centers like Uruk featured monumental architecture, most notably the ziggurat's massive step structures, serving religious and administrative functions. These temples were prominent features within the cityscape, symbolizing centralized authority and serving as focal points for religious ceremonies and governance. The construction and maintenance of such large-scale buildings required organized labor and social coordination. The complexity of these urban societies necessitated the development of systems to manage resources, labor, and information. Around 3200 BCE, writing emerged as a tool to address these administrative challenges. The earliest known form of writing in Mesopotamia is cuneiform, which began as pictographic marks inscribed on clay tablets. Initially, cuneiform was used primarily for record-keeping, such as tracking agricultural products, trade transactions, and labor contributions. Over time, writing expanded in scope to include legal documents, economic contracts, and eventually literary and historical texts. The invention of writing marked a significant advancement in human communication and administration, enabling greater complexity in governance and economic activities. Trade networks expanded during this period, connecting Uruk and other Mesopotamian cities with distant regions. Goods such as metals, precious stones, and crafted items were exchanged, facilitating cultural interactions and the diffusion of technologies. These exchanges contributed to the growth and wealth of urban centers. Social organization within cities became more stratified. Evidence from archaeological excavations indicates the presence of elite classes who controlled resources and wielded political and religious authority. Common artisans, laborers, and farmers formed the base of the social hierarchy. Burial practices and dwelling sizes further illustrate differences in status. The concentration of population, resources, and power in cities like Uruk established patterns that would influence later Mesopotamian civilizations. Urban life brought challenges, including resource management, social inequality, and the need for legal frameworks. The innovations of the Uruk period set the stage for the development of city-states and complex political entities. By 3100 BCE, the Uruk period was drawing to a close, and the early dynastic period was beginning. This transition marked the emergence of multiple city-states, each with its own ruler and patron deity. The innovations in urban planning, writing, and administration during the Uruk period formed the basis for the political and cultural developments that followed. A time of kings, gods, and burgeoning cities that laid the groundwork for civilization as we know it. His job was to maintain cosmic order on Earth. He was the chief administrator, the supreme judge, the top general, and the primary link between the people and the heavens. This powerful connection between kingship and religion became a defining feature of Mesopotamian civilization for thousands of years to come. Think of it as a combination of a central bank, a major corporation, and a government agency, all rolled into one. It owned vast tracts of land, managed massive storehouses of grain and goods, and coordinated huge labor forces for everything from farming to construction. Running this complex operation was a specialized class of priests. They weren't just spiritual guides, they were highly skilled administrators. They conducted the sacred rituals according to a strict calendar, managed the temple's immense wealth, and oversaw the intricate system of collection and redistribution that kept the city fed and functioning. Royal power and temple authority worked hand in hand. Kings would fund grand temple construction projects, and in return, the religious establishment would legitimize their rule. Early dynastic society was distinctly hierarchical. At the very top, you had the king and the high priests living lives of privilege. Below them were elite families, wealthy landowners, powerful officials, and successful merchants who controlled trade and resources. Their status was clear from the size of their homes and the lavish goods they were buried with. Further down the ladder were the skilled artisans. These were the potters, weavers, and metalworkers who created the tools, textiles, and luxury items that fueled the economy. Many of them worked in large workshops attached to the palace or the temple, part of the state-controlled production system. The vast majority of people, however, were farmers and laborers. Revealed a stark contrast between the simple graves of common folk and the spectacular tomb of a king or queen buried with a fortune in gold lapis lazuli and a retinue of sacrificed attendants. Despite the political fragmentation, these Sumerian city-states shared a remarkably consistent culture. They spoke the same language, worshipped a similar pantheon of gods like Anu the sky god, Enlil the god of wine, and Inanna the goddess of love and war, and organized their societies along similar lines. They were separate, yet deeply connected, part of a shared cultural world. This era of independent city-states, however, was destined to end. Around 2334 BCE, a new figure emerged from the north, Sargon of Akkad. He would conquer the Sumerian cities one by one, forging the world's first true empire, and marking the end of the early dynastic period, but the legacy of this era was immense. The fundamental institutions of kingship, temple administration, law, and urban life that were forged in the city-states of Sumer would endure for millennia, influencing every subsequent empire that rose and fell in the ancient Near East. Ever heard of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth? Chances are, you have. But did you know this famous phrase comes from one of the oldest and most complete sets of laws ever discovered? Let's travel back in time, almost 4,000 years, to ancient Babylon, and meet the man behind the code, King Hammurabi. Hammurabi ruled Babylon from 1792 to 1750 BC. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a master administrator. To unify his vast and diverse kingdom, he created something truly revolutionary, a single, comprehensive legal code for all his people. This wasn't just a list of rules, it was a public declaration of justice, carved for everyone to see on a massive stone pillar, or stele. Imagine walking through your city and seeing the laws written out for all to see. That was a huge deal back then. The Code of Hammurabi contains 282 laws, covering everything from property rights and trade to family law and professional standards. The famous eye for an eye principle, known as lex talionis, was central to it. If a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner, the builder was to be put to death. If it killed the owner's son, the builder's son would face the same fate, but it wasn't all so harsh. The code also introduced concepts we still value today, like the presumption of innocence. You were innocent until proven guilty, and the use of evidence in trials. However, justice wasn't exactly equal. The punishment you received heavily depended on your social status. A nobleman who injured a commoner would likely pay a fine, but if a commoner injured a nobleman, the punishment would be far more severe. Slaves, of course, were treated as property with very few rights. The laws also gave us a fascinating peek into daily life in Babylon. There were rules about renting oxen, what to do if your neighbor's dam broke and flooded your field, and even the fees a surgeon could charge for a successful operation. It regulated marriage, divorce, and inheritance, showing a society that was surprisingly complex and organized. For example, a woman could own property and even initiate a divorce under certain circumstances, which was quite progressive for the era. So, why does this ancient code still matter? The Code of Hammurabi was a monumental step forward in the development of law and society. It established the idea that government has a responsibility to provide justice for its people, and that law should be public and known. While many of its punishments seem brutal by today's standards, its influence can be traced through later legal systems, including those in the Bible and even foundational principles of modern law. It was a blueprint for civilization, an attempt to create order out of chaos through the power of the written word. What do you think? Was Hammurabi's code a fair system for its time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. For thousands of years, the story of civilization was a story of cities. In ancient Mesopotamia, places like Uruk, Ur, and Kish were the centers of the world. Each had its own king, its own gods, and its own patch of fertile land fed by irrigation canals. Power was local, and life revolved around the city walls. But then, around 2334 BCE, something new and revolutionary appeared on the world stage. A man named Sargon of Akkad decided that one city wasn't enough, it was time to build an empire. This is the story of how Mesopotamia traded its collection of independent cities for a new, grander, and more dangerous political experiment, the world's first empires. Before Sargon, Mesopotamian cities were constantly jostling for position. They fought over land, water, and control of trade routes. While they shared a common culture, they had no unified government. It was a world of intense local rivalries. But as these cities grew richer and their connections to the outside world deepened, The stage was set for a leader with bigger ambitions. That leader was Sargon. He started his career in the city of Kish, but soon broke away to forge his own destiny. He built a new capital, Akkad, a city so legendary we're still searching for its exact location, and from there, he launched a series of military campaigns that would change history. One by one, the proud cities of Sumer fell under his control. Sargon's conquest stretched from the Persian Gulf all the way up through what is now Iraq and Syria. For the first time, a single ruler governed this vast, diverse territory. The old city-states weren't destroyed, but their independence was gone. Sargon installed governors loyal to him, turning former kings into local managers. This new structure allowed for something unprecedented: the coordination of resources, laws, and military might across an entire region. To manage this sprawling domain, the Akkadian Empire developed sophisticated administrative techniques. The Akkadian language became the official language of government, creating a common tongue for bureaucrats from different backgrounds. Meanwhile, the ancient Sumerian language was preserved for religion and literature. A flood of written records on clay tablets shows us how the empire worked. We have tablets detailing everything from tax collection and grain distribution to the outfitting of soldiers. This wasn't just local bookkeeping anymore. This was the paperwork of an empire. Of course, you can't hold an empire together with paperwork alone. The Akkadian military was the backbone of its power. A professional, centrally supplied army allowed Sargon and his successors to put down rebellions and secure vital trade routes. These routes brought in precious resources like timber, stone, and metals that were scarce in the river plains of Mesopotamia. The empire also had to manage a diverse population. While local religious traditions continued, they now operated under the watchful eye of the central government. Art and royal inscriptions from this time don't just celebrate a local king. They proclaim the power of an emperor who ruled over many lands and peoples. Sargon's dynasty continued after his death. His grandson, Naram-Sin, took the empire to its peak. He adopted the magnificent title King of the Four Quarters of the World, a clear statement of his universal ambition. But ruling a world is hard work. The bigger the empire grew, the more it had to deal with internal revolts and threats from outside. By the late 22nd century BCE, the Akkadian dream was starting to crumble. The complex administration began to fail. Trade routes were disrupted, and regional leaders started to reassert their independence. Then came pressure from a group known as the Gutians from the Zagros Mountains. The combination of internal decay and external attacks was too much. Around 2154 BCE, the Akkadian Empire, the world's first great imperial experiment, collapsed. In the aftermath, Mesopotamia fractured once more. The Gutians controlled parts of the land, but they didn't build a new empire. Power became decentralized again, and the grand, coordinated system of the Akkadians vanished. It seemed as if the age of empires had been a brief, failed experiment, but the idea didn't die. Around 2112 BCE, a new power rose from the ancient city of Ur. This period, known as the Third Dynasty of Ur, or the Neo-Sumerian Empire, represented a grand revival of centralized control, but with a new twist. The rulers of Ur, like the great king Shulgi, were obsessed with order and bureaucracy. They created one of the most highly organized states the world had ever seen. The Ur III state was a machine of administration. Standardized weights and measures were imposed everywhere. Taxes, labor, and agricultural production were tracked with meticulous detail on countless cuneiform tablets. Society was organized into a rigid hierarchy, with armies of workers conscripted for massive public works projects, like digging canals and building temples. Justice was also standardized. King Ur-Nammu created one of history's first known law codes, which favored fines over brutal physical punishments, a surprisingly modern approach. For a time, this hyper-organized system worked brilliantly, bringing stability and prosperity back to southern Mesopotamia. But like the Akkadians before them, the rulers of Ur found their empire difficult to sustain. The bureaucracy was incredibly demanding, and external threats were mounting. Migrating groups of Amorites and invasions from the rival kingdom of Elam put immense pressure on the state. Around 2000 for BCE, the city of Ur was sacked, and the Neo-Sumerian Empire fell apart. Once again, Mesopotamia splintered. The next few centuries are known as the Old Babylonian period, a time when city-states like Isin, Larsa, and a little-known town called Babylon vied for dominance. For a while, Babylon was just another player in a crowded field. But that all changed when a new king came to the throne in 1792 BCE. His name was Hammurabi. Through a masterful combination of diplomacy and warfare, Hammurabi systematically defeated his rivals and forged a new empire. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a brilliant administrator. He repaired canals, secured trade routes, and unified the patchwork of territories he had conquered under a single, efficient government. Hammurabi's most famous legacy, of course, is his law code. Engraved on a massive stone stele, the Code of Hammurabi laid out hundreds of laws covering everything from property rights to family law and professional conduct. While it might not have been a law book in the modern sense, it was a powerful symbol of the king's commitment to justice and order throughout his empire. It declared that a single standard of law applied to everyone, from the powerful to the weak. It was the ultimate expression of centralized authority. Yet, even this great empire could not last forever. After Hammurabi's death, his successors struggled to hold things together. And then, in 1595 BCE, a distant army of Hittites swept down from Anatolia and sacked the city of Babylon, bringing the Old Babylonian Empire to a sudden and dramatic end. From the rise of Sargon to the fall of Babylon, Mesopotamia witnessed a dramatic cycle of empire building and collapse. Each empire, from the Akkadian to the Neo-Sumerian to the Babylonian, was an attempt to solve the problem of how to govern vast territories and diverse peoples. They created powerful armies, sophisticated bureaucracies, and universal legal systems. And even though each of these empires eventually fell, the idea of empire itself endured. They left behind a legacy of administrative and cultural innovations that would shape the course of history in the Near East and beyond for millennia to come. The age of the city-state was over. The age of empires had begun. Have you ever heard of an empire so powerful, so innovative, and so utterly dominant that its name echoed with fear and respect across the ancient world? Today, we read journeying back in time to uncover the story of one of history's most formidable superpowers, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. From roughly 911 to 609 BCE, this Mesopotamian giant didn't just conquer lands. It rewrote the rules of war, governance, and imperial control, leaving a legacy that would shape civilizations for centuries to come. So, where did this mighty empire come from? Its heartland was in northern Mesopotamia, a region we now know as northern Iraq. The ancient city of Ashur was its first capital, but as the empire's power grew, so did its magnificent cities. Places like Nimrud and the legendary Nineveh rose to become sprawling centers of administration, culture, and military might. These weren't just cities. They were the command centers of an ever-expanding world, bustling with officials, soldiers, artisans, and merchants, all working to fuel the imperial machine. At the very top of this pyramid of power was the Assyrian king, but he wasn't just a ruler. He was seen as the earthly representative of their chief god, Ashur. This divine connection was everything. It gave the king the sacred duty to maintain cosmic order and to expand the god's domain, which, conveniently, meant expanding the empire's borders. Every military campaign, every conquest, was framed as a holy mission, a divine mandate to bring the world under the rule of Ashur and his chosen king. This powerful ideology was the ultimate justification for their relentless expansion. And when it came to expansion, the Neo-Assyrians were masters of the game. Their military was unlike anything the world had seen before. This wasn't a seasonal militia. It was a large, professional, standing army, and it was armed with the cutting-edge technology of the day, iron weapons. Iron swords, spears, and armor gave them a significant advantage over their bronze-equipped enemies. But their real genius lay in strategy and technology. They perfected coordinated attacks using infantry, cavalry, and fearsome war chariots. More than that, they were the undisputed champions of siege warfare. If a city dared to close its gates to the Assyrian army, it was a grave mistake. The Assyrians would roll out a terrifying arsenal of siege engines, massive battering rams, mobile siege towers, and expert sappers who would tunnel under walls to make them collapse. Their ability to conquer heavily fortified cities was legendary and a key reason for their rapid expansion. The goal of these constant campaigns was twofold: to seize new territory and, just as importantly, to control vital trade routes. and natural resources, ensuring a steady flow of wealth back to the imperial heartland. How do we know so much about their military victories? Because the Assyrians told us themselves in spectacular fashion. The walls of their grand palaces were covered in incredibly detailed stone carvings, called reliefs. These reliefs were like ancient action movies, depicting the king leading his armies, cities being besieged, and foreign rulers bowing in submission to pay tribute. They were a powerful form of propaganda, a constant reminder to anyone visiting the palace of the king's might and the futility of resistance. But conquering a vast empire is one thing, running it is another. And the Neo-Assyrians were brilliant administrators. They divided their massive territory into provinces, each managed by a governor appointed by the king. These governors were responsible for collecting taxes, enforcing the law, and maintaining local order. To keep this sprawling empire connected, they built an impressive network of roads and relay stations. This royal road system allowed messengers on horseback to travel quickly, carrying royal decrees and intelligence reports from the farthest corners of the empire back to the capital. It was the ancient world's internet, enabling the central government to maintain tight control over its distant provinces. This level of organization required meticulous record-keeping. The Assyrians used the traditional Mesopotamian writing system, cuneiform, pressing wedge-shaped marks onto wet clay tablets. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands upon thousands of these tablets. They're not just epic poems, they are the nitty-gritty details of running an empire. Legal contracts, tax records, supply inventories, and detailed military reports. This vast bureaucratic archive was the software that ran the hardware of the Assyrian state, allowing for efficient management of people, resources, and wealth. The empire's economy was a three-legged stool: agriculture, trade, and tribute. The fertile plains of Mesopotamia produced abundant grain, feeding the cities and the army. Their control over trade routes brought in exotic goods and materials from Anatolia, the Levant, and even the Arabian Peninsula. And, of course, there was tribute, a constant stream of gold, silver, timber, horses, and other valuable goods extracted from the peoples they conquered. This immense wealth funded the lavish lifestyle of the court, paid for the professional army, and financed the construction of their monumental cities and temples. And what magnificent constructions they were! The Neo-Assyrian period was a golden age for art and architecture. Kings built colossal palaces, like the famous palace, without a rival, built by Sennacherib at Nineveh. These structures were adorned with the intricate reliefs we mentioned earlier, as well as giant stone statues of winged bulls with human heads called lamassu, which guarded the gateways and were meant to intimidate visitors with their power and mystique. But perhaps their greatest cultural contribution was the creation of libraries. King Ashurbanipal, one of the last great Assyrian kings, was not just a warrior, but also a scholar. He had a passion for collecting knowledge and ordered scribes to gather and copy texts from all over Mesopotamia. He established a massive library at Nineveh, which held over 30,000 clay tablets. This library preserved an incredible wealth of Mesopotamian culture, including scientific texts, medical manuals, and literary masterpieces like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Without Ashurbanipal's library, much of what we know about ancient Mesopotamia might have been lost forever. Despite its immense power and sophisticated systems, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was not invincible. Ruling such a vast and diverse territory was a constant struggle. Rebellions were frequent, as conquered peoples often resented the heavy taxes and brutal rule. The empire was in a near-constant state of putting out fires, which drained its military and resources. At the same time, new powers were rising on its borders. In the south, the Babylonians were growing stronger and more restless, while to the east, the Medes were consolidating their power in the mountains of modern-day Iran. The end came swiftly and violently. A powerful coalition of Babylonians and Medes joined forces to challenge the Assyrian hegemon. After a series of devastating battles, they marched on the capital itself. In 612 BCE, the great city of Nineveh, once the center of the world, was besieged, captured, and utterly destroyed. The fall was so complete that the city was lost to history for over 2,000 years, buried under the sands until archaeologists rediscovered it in the 19th century. A few remaining Assyrian forces held out for a couple more years, but by 609 BCE, the once mighty Neo-Assyrian Empire was no more. But its legacy endured. the Assyrians had created a blueprint for empire. Their military innovations, like the use of iron, combined arms tactics, and siegecraft, were studied and copied by those who came after them. Their administrative systems, with provincial governors and efficient communication networks, became a model for future empires, including the Neo-Babylonians and, most notably, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, which would go on to rule an even larger territory. Their cultural achievements, preserved in Ashurbanipal's library, ensured that the rich intellectual heritage of Mesopotamia was passed down through the ages. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was a story of incredible innovation, brutal conquest, and sophisticated control. It stands as a testament to human ambition and ingenuity, a civilization that, for 3 centuries, stood at the very center of the ancient world. Its rise and fall is a dramatic chapter in our shared human story, reminding us that even the mightiest empires eventually return to dust, but their ideas can live on forever. Thank you so much. We're exploring the bustling trade networks of Mesopotamia, the lifeblood that connected civilizations from around 2000 BCE all the way to the fall of Babylon in 539 BCE. Nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Mesopotamia was more than just the cradle of civilization. It was a central hub in a vast, interconnected ancient world. The rivers themselves were the original superhighways. Imagine boats and barges, laden with goods, navigating these vital water corridors. They carried bulky commodities like grain and timber, making trade efficient and linking distant cities. But the network didn't stop at the water's edge. Overland caravan routes stretched like a web across plains, through rugged mountain passes, and along the fringes of deserts. These paths connected Mesopotamia with Anatolia to the northwest, the Levant to the west, the Iranian plateau to the east, and the Arabian Peninsula to the south. It was a truly globalized world, ancient style. So, what were they trading? Mesopotamia was a fertile land, but it lacked many essential resources. To build their magnificent cities and fuel their homes, they needed timber, which they imported from the Zagros Mountains and the coastal forests of Lebanon. To craft the bronze tools and weapons that defined an era, they needed copper and tin, sourced from Anatolia and the Iranian highlands. And for a touch of luxury, they craved precious materials. Lapis lazuli, with its deep blue hue, traveled all the way from Afghanistan. Vibrant carnelian stones made the long journey from the Indus Valley. These weren't just goods, they were symbols of wealth, power, and connection. In return, Mesopotamia exported its own treasures. Its artisans were masters of their craft. Finely woven woolen textiles, beautifully decorated ceramics, sharp metal tools, and exquisite jewelry were in high demand across the Near East. Intricately carved cylinder seals, used to mark ownership and authorize documents, were not just practical items, but also miniature works of art that showcased Mesopotamian skill and influence. Of course, a trade network of this scale required incredible organization. This wasn't some chaotic, unregulated marketplace. Mesopotamian merchants were meticulous record keepers. Using cuneiform script on durable clay tablets, they documented everything: transactions, contracts, loans, and business partnerships. These tablets served as both receipts and legal proof, creating a framework that could settle disputes and ensure fairness. To further standardize commerce, they developed systems of weights and measures, ensuring that a mina of silver in Ur was the same as a mina of silver in Mari. This bustling economic activity wasn't just driven by private entrepreneurs. State and temple institutions played a massive role. Temples were more than just places of worship, they were powerful economic engines. They owned vast tracts of land, managed labor forces, and oversaw the production of goods. They often acted as central storehouses, collecting agricultural surplus and redistributing it or trading it for needed materials. Royal administrations also got involved, setting trade policies, securing dangerous caravan routes, and forging diplomatic ties with other kingdoms to facilitate safe passage for their merchants. A perfect example of this is the ancient city of Mari, situated on the middle Euphrates. Archaeologists there unearthed a massive palace archive containing thousands of cuneiform tablets. These documents paint a vivid picture of the city's role as a major trading hub. They detail correspondence between kings, officials, and merchants, tracking the flow of goods like textiles, grain, silver, and livestock between Mesopotamia, Syria, and beyond. The tablets reveal the sheer complexity and scale of these ancient commercial networks. Later, during the first millennium BCE, the powerful Assyrian Empire took this organization to a new level. They established a system of dedicated trade colonies known as Karam, most famously in Anatolia. Think of these as permanent commercial outposts where Assyrian merchants lived and did business year-round. The Karam were vital for the exchange of tin and textiles from Assyria for metals from Anatolia. This highly organized system shows how the empire could project its economic power far beyond its political borders, creating a sphere of influence built on commerce. Trade wasn't limited to land and river routes. The Persian Gulf was a gateway to a wider maritime world. Ports like Ur and Eridu bustled with ships arriving from distant lands. These seafaring traders brought exotic goods from the Arabian Peninsula, the coast of East Africa, and even the sophisticated Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan and India. Spices, ivory, and rare precious stones flowed into Mesopotamia, enriching its culture and broadening its horizons. Crucially, these trade routes carried more than just goods. They were conduits for ideas, innovations, and culture. As merchants traveled, they brought their customs, beliefs, and technologies with them. The cuneiform writing system, developed for keeping economic records, was adopted and adapted by neighboring cultures for their own administrative needs. Religious ideas and artistic styles mingled and merged. Mesopotamian gods found new worshippers in distant lands, and foreign motifs appeared in Mesopotamian art. This constant exchange created a shared cultural landscape across the ancient Near East, where mythologies, rituals, and knowledge were constantly evolving. The rise of commerce also reshaped Mesopotamian society itself. A distinct social class of merchants and traders emerged, gaining wealth and influence. Their activities were protected by sophisticated legal codes, like the famous Code of Hammurabi, which had specific laws governing contracts, loans, and business conduct. The wealth generated from trade fueled the growth of cities, funding the construction of monumental temples, palaces, and ziggurats. It sponsored the arts and allowed for a flourishing of culture. However, being an ancient merchant wasn't easy. Long-distance trade was fraught with danger. Caravans faced the constant threat of banditry in the lawless territories between cities. Political instability could suddenly close borders or disrupt routes. And they were always at the mercy of the environment, from treacherous desert crossings to seasonal river floods that could halt transport for months. To mitigate these risks, they developed clever solutions. Caravans were often accompanied by military escorts. Fortified trading posts were built along key routes to offer protection. And diplomacy became a key tool, as kings negotiated treaties to ensure safe passage for their merchants through foreign lands. Despite these immense challenges, the benefits of trade were too great to ignore. The drive for resources and wealth ensured that these networks not only survived, but thrived for centuries. The integration of Mesopotamia into this vast web of exchange was a defining feature of its civilization, shaping its economy, society, and culture from the early 2nd millennium BCE right up until its conquest by the Persian king Cyrus the Great in 539 BCE. The fall of Babylon marked the end of an era of Mesopotamian political independence. But the trade routes and the cultural connections they had forged did not disappear. They were inherited and expanded by the successive empires that ruled the region. The legacy of Mesopotamian commerce laid the foundation for the economic and cultural development of the ancient world, creating a web of interconnectedness that would continue to shape human history for millennia to come. Imagine a world dotted with bustling, independent cities. For centuries, this was Mesopotamia. Places like Uruk, Ur, and Kish were powerful, but their power stopped at the edge of their fields. Each city had its own ruler, its own gods, and its own way of life. They were like tiny kingdoms, often squabbling over land, water, and trade. But around 2334 BCE, everything changed. A new idea was born, one that would reshape history: the empire. This is the story of how city-states gave way to sprawling empires, forever changing the way humans organized themselves. It all started with one man, Sargon of Akkad. He wasn't born a king. In fact, early stories say he started his career working for the king of Kish, but Sargon had bigger plans. He broke away, founded his own capital city, Akkad, a city we're still searching for today, and began a series of military campaigns that would unite Mesopotamia like never before. One by one, the proud Sumerian cities of the south fell under his control. Suddenly, they weren't independent anymore. Sargon installed his own loyal officials, turning these once fierce rivals into provinces of a single, unified state. This was the Akkadian Empire, the world's first true empire. To hold it all together, Sargon's administration was revolutionary. Akkadian became the official language of government, creating a common tongue for officials from different regions. They standardized taxes, organized massive labor projects, and kept meticulous records on clay tablets. We found thousands of these tablets, detailing everything from grain harvests to troop movements. They paint a picture of a highly organized, centrally controlled society. The empire wasn't just held together by paperwork, it had a powerful army. Sargon's military was a professional force, supplied and paid by the state. This allowed them to launch long-distance campaigns, securing vital trade routes that brought in precious metals, timber, and stone from as far away as modern-day Turkey and Iran. Sargon's successors, like his grandson Naram-Sin, expanded the empire even further. Naram-Sin was so powerful he declared himself a living god and took the title king of the four quarters, essentially claiming to rule the entire known world. But ruling the world is hard work. The bigger the empire grew, the more it struggled. Rebellions popped up constantly, and enemies gathered at the borders. A group from the Zagros Mountains, known as the Gutians, began to cause trouble. By around 2154 BCE, weakened from within and pressured from without, the great Akkadian Empire crumbled. After the fall of Akkad, Mesopotamia splintered again. The Gutians controlled parts of the land, but they didn't build a new empire. For a time, it seemed the age of empires was just a brief experiment. But the idea was too powerful to disappear. Around 2112 BCE, the city of Ur rose to prominence. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a revival of Sumerian culture on an imperial scale. This new state, known as the Ur III dynasty, was perhaps the most bureaucratic society the world had ever seen. The kings of Ur, especially Ur-Nammu and his son Shulgi, were master organizers. They created a state that was a marvel of efficiency. Every province had a governor who reported directly to the king. They standardized weights and measures, making trade and taxation fair and predictable across the realm. They organized huge workforces for massive building projects, like reinforcing the canal systems that were the lifeblood of the region. And they gave us one of the world's earliest known law codes, the Code of Ur-Nammu. It was a sophisticated legal system that often preferred fines over brutal physical punishments, showing a desire for justice and order. We know so much about this period because they wrote everything down. We have countless tablets recording the smallest details of their economy. But this obsession with control may have been their undoing. The bureaucracy was massive and expensive to maintain. Meanwhile, new groups, like the Amorites, were migrating into the area, and the rival kingdom of Elam was growing stronger. Around 2004 BCE, Ur fell to invaders, and the Neo-Sumerian dream of a perfectly ordered world collapsed. Once again, Mesopotamia was a patchwork of competing city-states. This new era is called the Old Babylonian period. Cities like Isin, Larsa, and a rising power called Babylon vied for dominance. For a while, no single city could gain the upper hand. Then, in 1790 BCE, a new king ascended the throne in Babylon. His name was Hammurabi. Hammurabi was a brilliant strategist and a patient diplomat. For years, he built up his strength, made and broke alliances, and then, when the time was right, he struck. One by one, he conquered his rivals, and in a few short decades, he forged a new empire with Babylon at its heart. Like the empires before him, Hammurabi focused on administration and infrastructure. He repaired canals, secured trade routes, and created a unified government. But Hammurabi's most famous legacy is his law code. Engraved on a massive stone stele, the Code of Hammurabi listed nearly 300 laws covering everything from property disputes to personal injury. While it might have been more of a monument to his justice than a practical legal manual, it shows a powerful commitment to creating a single, predictable standard of law for all his people. It was a powerful symbol of imperial authority. But like all great empires of this age, Babylon's dominance couldn't last forever. After Hammurabi's death, his successors struggled to hold things together. Then, in 1595 BCE, A distant army of Hittites swept down from the north, sacked the great city of Babylon, and brought the Old Babylonian Empire to an end. From Sargon of Akkad to the fall of Babylon, Mesopotamia witnessed a dramatic cycle of unification and collapse. These first empires were incredible experiments in politics and society. They created vast administrative systems, organized huge armies, and wrote laws that would echo through history. Though each empire eventually fell, the idea of empire itself, of a centralized state ruling over diverse peoples and vast territories, would become one of the most enduring political structures in human history. The legacy of these ancient pioneers of power is still with us today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the ancient past, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories from history.